Hello, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host for this week, Shannon Vasconcelos. And by the time you're hearing this, I think just about everybody, no matter where you're listening to us from, at least in the US, will be back to school for the fall. As we're recording today, my kids went back to school yesterday. It was touch and go there for a while, but they did survive day one. I know you all must be very concerned. Let's see if they make it through day two. We'll find out. But we have got a great and I would say kind of varied show on tap for you today. So later on in the show, we're going to be sharing some tips for college interviews that I think folks will find really helpful. And we will be breaking down the basics of the One Big Beautiful Bill and how that provisions of that bill may change how you might pay for college. But before all of that, we are going to talk a bit about working part-time in high school. And joining me to dig into this topic is my colleague, Shayla Bezjak-Martinez. Welcome, Shayla.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you. And I think this is your first appearance on the podcast, right?
Yes, this is.
Awesome. We are so excited to have you. Do you want to just kind of briefly introduce yourself to our listeners so that they get to know you a little bit?
Sure. Hi, listeners in the void. My name is Shayla Bezjak-Martinez. I'm here at College Coach. Before College Coach, I worked at Harvey Mudd College, read college applications for WPI, did some reading with Summer Science Program, as well as the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation. That's kind of my history in terms of my career. I'm a Smith College graduate, and I am from Denver, Colorado.
Fantastic. And I'm a UMass Amherst graduate. So we were just
Ooh,
down the road from each other,
yeah.
Shayla. Awesome. So now we know a bit about your, I guess, sort of post-college professional career since we're talking about jobs in high school. Did you work in high school?
I did indeed. I started working pretty early. So most of my high school, I guess, career was based in youth sports. So first, I started as like a assistant coach for youth sports, probably in eighth or ninth grade. And then by the time I was a senior, I was the head coach of some of my youth sports teams, ranging from softball to basketball, mostly was where I was most comfortable. But usually just Denver Parks and Rec was my entire high school career. And then in summers, that also included doing summer day camps, so working longer hours during the day, kind of wrangling children,
Yes.
doing either sports camps or like arts and crafts related things.
That is so awesome. I love to just hear everybody's unique experiences and learn about all the different possibilities they are for high school students. And I was in high school, I worked at a dry cleaners. So
Mm.
I bet you probably had more fun than I did coaching all the sports teams, but it wasn't a bad job. So what do you think, having obviously done it yourself and worked with a number of students who have done part-time jobs in high school, what do you think the benefits of having a job are?
Yeah, there's so many benefits of having a part-time job. I think for so many students, their central like identity and understanding of the world comes from inside the home or inside the community that they've been in for school. And
Mhm.
typically, having a part time job takes you outside of that community. So it gives you some perspective. It allows us to interact with folks from different parts of your community, with a lot of different backgrounds. So it really is kind of that perspective building.
Yes.
But you're also learning how to interact with a wide range of people. So in my positions, got a lot of interaction with not only children ranging from like 5 to 12 years old, um, with various attitudes and various needs and emotions,
Yeah.
but also parents who were, you know, facing circumstances where they had to drop their students off at a day long camp and kind of navigating those different relationships as well. And sometimes navigating conflict with those parents, especially
Yes.
if their students weren't quite behaving like we needed them to behave at these camps. And I'm sure you also faced some conflicts with, why isn't this stain out yet? Like,
100%. I can tell you, I used to say when I was working at the dry cleaners, like, you haven't seen an upset person until you couldn't get the stain out of their favorite shirt. And then when I was in college, I worked at like a national park lodge, like checking folks
mm,
into the hotel. And then I had the added perspective, oh, you really haven't seen an upset person until you've ruined their vacation. Then they're really mad. Then I worked in a financial aid office after college. And then I realized, oh no, it's next level when you haven't provided a parent with the aid they need to send their kid to their dream school. Now you're really dealing with an upset person. But I feel like all of those smaller scale situations along the way of dealing with conflict with customers of sorts helps prepare you for future conflicts and challenges in a more sort of professional career setting.
yeah, definitely. And I don't want to scare any people thinking that going into their first job is going to be all conflict. It's really
No.
not. But that's only one of the things that you're going to be potentially navigating. I think students who have part-time jobs during high school also develop a different sense of responsibility, of course, because now you're not necessarily only connected to the responsibility that you have for yourself or for your family, maybe doing chores. But now you have a manager and maybe you have peers and other employees who, if you don't show up to work that day, it is going to affect them and going to affect
Yeah.
kind of the larger system. So being in that, I've seen a lot of students, not only that I've worked with through College Coach, but other students that I've been interacting with in my personal life who take on a huge role, take on a huge
Yeah.
responsibility and have to navigate high school and work. And it builds their character in a different way that is quite impressive, I think, for a 16, 17, 8-year-old, 18-year-old.
100%. And now for everyone on the line that's like, yeah, yes, Shayla, it builds character. We want to know if it helps in the admissions process. Does it?
I mean, isn't that the question everyone always asks is, does the specific thing I do
Yeah.
impact me? Is working my job at an ice cream shop going to make me get into college? Like, probably not, because the things that we do on our activities list are all taken into context. So we cannot say that specifically working a part-time job will have the positive impact that it needs
Hmm.
to have on your application. That being said, if we're looking at the activities that you've done and the skills that you've gathered, that just builds to a student's story. So, yes, I think when I view students who have worked part time jobs, um, I am impressed with their ability to balance their schoolwork and their um, work.
Hmm.
And that does impact the way that I might evaluate a student in assuming that they are going to be good at balancing their time as a college student or that
Yes.
they have taken on different responsibilities in the past. So I don't want to say that it's necessarily a make or break. Nothing is
Mhm.
really a make or break in college applications, but I think it does add again a little bit of not necessarily pizzazz to an application, but it adds a little bit of something, especially, of course, when we're considering that the folks who are reading your applications also are humans and also probably
Yes.
worked in high school or come in with different backgrounds. So, of course, when I see students who did some type of coaching as a high school
Mm.
student, I get really excited by that because that's the similar background that I have, and I feel like I can connect to them in a little bit of a different way.
That makes a lot of sense. Are some jobs better than others?
No, not necessarily. Again, it's kind of everything is taken into the context. So,
Yeah.
on the application where college admissions officers are going to be viewing if you've worked
Hmm.
is probably in the activities list, where
Yes.
you're going to be listing out this is the job that I did, this was my position, here's a description of what I did or the accomplishments I met or just, skills that I've learned. So
Hmm.
that's how we're going to get to learn, again, the job that you did, the duration. Was it 1 hour a week for your freshman year? Was it 20 hours a week from your sophomore to your senior year? And that's the part that matters a little bit more. So
Mm.
it's not about what the job is, but how big was your time commitment? Um, how did you navigate it with your schoolwork as well as any other activities that you were participating in? That's kind of the nuance of that question.
Makes sense. So I can definitely see it showing up in that activity list. Do jobs ever show up anywhere else in the college application? Like, can you write your college essay about the job that you had? Are there other options to showcase your work?
Yeah, definitely. I've read quite a few essays, personal statement essays, where students have discussed how their job has impacted them or how this experience in working, ranging from working in a fast food place to working as a small business owner or a street vendor. There's a lot of different things. Or again, the classic working at a summer camp, which a lot of students do. And if they can speak about it in a very specific way or in a way that reflects the student's story, yes, you can definitely use that to showcase your experience with part time work a little bit more. Other areas where it might come up, maybe a student wants their supervisor or their manager to write them a letter of recommendation. I've definitely
Mm.
read some recommendation letters from supervisors or managers. Those are probably the main places where it's going to come up outside of the activities list.
Perfect. And should whatever this experience is that you have, are we calling it a job or are we calling it an internship, or does the sort of position matter?
I think it kind of depends. It is always a little silly when a student calls something an internship and I'm like, wait, that's a job, or like an internship as a ice cream scooper. I'm like, I think
Yeah.
you were hired for that. Um, so if you are being paid for it, like that is a job. We want to call it that. Um, Internships, of course, there can be paid internships. Um, there's some nuance there, but I like to say, like, if you applied for it, if you were being paid for it, if it's not necessarily in the field that you are going toward,
Mhm.
then maybe that is a part-time job versus if you are job shadowing or doing things that are relevant to your field of interest or to your study or area of interest, that can maybe be more of that internship or honestly volunteer work in
Yeah.
some circumstances as well.
Right. And I think we get this question because students or parents sometimes have the sense that an internship sounds really important and impressive and a part-time job doesn't. But that's not the case, right?
No, that is not the case at all. And we can typically tell in reading the description of what you're doing how it falls. I think some of my funniest experiences is when I'm talking to a students about their internship and it turns out that they job shadowed a parent and I'm kind of taken aback, like, oh, okay, so internship is a buzzword here. And it's definitely something us as admission officers know how to navigate, that not every internship or not everything with the label of internship is going to be viewed the same way just because it has that label.
Yeah,
Same thing with the job. We kind of read between the lines um, in those circumstances.
that makes a lot of sense. And so we talked a lot about jobs in high school and what they can do for you, both in the admissions process and just in terms of your life and character building, and just learning what you like, what you don't like, who you are to some extent. What about working in college? Is there any sort of difference? Is it the same benefits? Any reason not to work in college from your perspective?
Yeah, working in college is a little bit different because likely your classes are going to have a little bit more rigor. You're going to be encountering more difficult classes, a larger course load. So that can definitely be something that you have to think about a little bit more. Do I want to take on a role in college? Work study programs are definitely available, and they can also be part of your financial aid package. I know I did work study when I was in college. I started off in the dining services. So I was like a dishwasher as a freshman. And then I jumped around to being a library assistant. Then I worked at a daycare for a semester. Then I luckily found a position in the student life office, working with first generation college students, which is what I am. So it was very much like, yes, I'm working with my people. But it took me a while to get there. So
Yes.
navigating jobs in high school or is different than navigating jobs in
Hmm.
college because there are probably limited options, especially if you are going um, to maybe a smaller town where you can't get a job at a local restaurant because people who live in that town are working at that restaurant.
Hmm.
And you might only have options on campus. But that's definitely something that you'll want to discuss with your family, but also with potential financial aid officers in terms
Hmm.
of, am I working to pay for college or am I working to have pocket money? And
Yep.
what is that going to look like as I navigate my first semester? And do I want to do that my first semester or do I want to get accumulated to the campus and then maybe try it later down the line? So it's definitely more of more something to think about as you navigate what college actually looks like because it is
Yes.
going to be different from your high school experience.
Yeah. And I think it is such a personal decision that different people approach in different ways and find different benefits of. I think that's a really good point. Like maybe you want to give it a semester and get used to like what a college schedule is before you incorporate a job into that. The flip side that I've also seen is students who are maybe like having a little bit of trouble adjusting to college and they get a part-time job and that like really kind of grounds them and creates like a social network and helps like provide sort of like a schedule for them so they don't feel so lost in this big new environment. So yeah, I think it's like so personal and can work for different people in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We're just about out of time, Shayla, but thank you so much for joining me today on your first podcast appearance. We're excited to have you. Hope to see you in more or hear you, I guess, in more podcasts
Oh
down the
yeah.
line.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun. I love talking.
Perfect. And this is the place for you. Awesome. And listeners, if you love listening, stick around. We're going to have a quick commercial break. When we get back, we are going to share some insights on the college interview process. So hang around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And we are now joined by my colleague and former admissions officer at the University of Southern California, Jonathan Wickremasinghe-Kuhn. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, Shannon. Happy to be here.
So happy to have you. So, we are chatting today about college interviews, which I think can be kind of a stressful part of the college admissions process for a lot of folks. Well, I can remember when I was applying to college and I had to do a couple of interviews and I was deathly afraid of them, rightly or wrongly. I think we'll learn if I should have been so afraid or not. Um, but I'm hoping we can remove a little bit of the stress of this interview process for folks today and help students feel a little bit more prepared. So I think we should start with sort of in the grandest view, what is the purpose of admissions interviews? Why are they offered? Why do colleges have students maybe do this?
Yeah, it's really just to get to know the student outside of their application. The purpose of these interviews is not to try to stump the student or have oh, gotcha. We really want the students to succeed when we're doing these interviews and to get to know them a bit because you can only learn so much about someone through the application and the writing. Of course, they want to try to present themselves as best they can in the application, but there's usually another layer or level to it when you're meeting someone in person. So it's really a way of rounding that out. Sometimes it's just for admission purposes, sometimes for scholarship purposes. There might be an interview component. So obviously the the intention can vary if it's deciding, is this going in their admission application for, so we can decide if they're admitted, have they been admitted, and we're deciding whether we're awarding a scholarship. But either way, I think the big thing that students are thinking about is I'm just letting them know a little bit about who I am, connecting with them a little bit.
Perfect. And is there some element of it that's also kind of marketing from the school standpoint? I know students, I'm sure, want to impress their interviewers, but are the interviewers trying to impress the student as well in some cases?
Yeah, I would say, a little bit in the admission interviews, if they're optional. They're also kind of marketing and answering questions for students. And I would
Yeah.
say, certainly, at least my experience with scholarship interviews is, these are highly qualified students who probably got a lot of acceptances. So
Yeah.
while, yeah, on the one hand, you get to decide if, or you're part of the decision process if they get a scholarship or not, you're also sometimes like, wow, this student's amazing. I want them to come here. So you're,
Yeah.
answering questions and trying to promote the school. So it does go both directions for sure.
Yeah. And who are you actually interviewing with? Is it an admissions officer?
I'd say most likely a lot of the times it will be, particularly if you're doing an in-person interview or it's being coordinated through the admission office. But that can vary. Some universities might use alumni, so they might do a local interview where they, connect with you and schedule an interview at a coffee shop or something like that. For a scholarship interview, you might interview with a panel, which might have
Mhm.
usually an admission or some sort of staff person is a part of it, maybe an academic advisor. And then a professor might be a part of it,
Mm.
yeah, potentially one connected to the major that you applied to.
Right.
And sometimes current students might be a part of it.
Ah.
Um, so either a part of a panel, or I know when I was in the admission office, we had our senior interns occasionally do some of the admission interviews as well once they had been fully trained on that. And if we had live interviews that day, we're like, hey, we're pulling you in to help out.
Awesome. And as a student, is there anything you can do to prepare for an interview?
Yeah, I would say, well, I'd start with one thing not to do, and that's don't
Mm.
try to memorize a script because one, it comes across as disingenuous or forced or robotic sometimes, depending on how
Mhm.
you deliver it. You don't want a monologue. It needs to be a back and forth process. And so, but you want to think about kind of what you want to talk about. So you might have a couple of things of like, hey, this is a big accomplishment, something I'm really proud of. I want an opportunity to share it. And so you come in with potential things. And really, I think you can brainstorm, well, what types of questions could I use to talk about this? Like, certainly, if someone asks, and this is a question I've asked before, what's an accomplishment that you're really proud of? Well, that's a
Mhm.
very straightforward way. But maybe you don't get that question, but you get something where you're like, oh, I can connect that. And so,
Yes.
you don't want to force it into there. If the opportunity doesn't come up, it doesn't come up. But it's helpful ahead of time to kind of think about how might you respond to these things, but still be kind of organic. Same way I prepared for this conversation we're having right now with what the
Mhm.
questions are going to be, but I didn't try to memorize anything. But I thought about, okay, here's the points I want to hit. So it hopefully it becomes a bit of a back and forth. You kind of,
Yes.
as that interview goes, you figure out what the cadence is and what the connection is with that interviewer, interviewers. And so if you over prepare, I think that leads to nerves, particularly if you're like, oh, I missed a line, so to speak, of what I was going to
Right.
say. That's why you don't want to try to memorize something. You just want to
Yes.
have some ideas, but then just kind of think about the types of questions you might get as well.
That makes sense. And as we think about preparing, I know some people out there listening will think this is a silly question, but I know that it's on a lot of people's minds. As I used to manage the College Coach YouTube channel, and to this day, um, one of our videos with the highest views is about what you should wear to your college interview. So I know some people are rolling their eyes at me and other people are saying, "Oh, thank you, Shannon. Thank God you asked that." What should
Yeah.
you wear,
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yeah, we would get that question emailed to us sometimes from people doing
Yeah.
interviews as well. So it's definitely out there. It changes a little bit if it's in person or in Zoom, just in terms
Yeah.
of, what you're having to present. But I would say to start at least business casual. So
Mhm.
for the young men, I would say a button-up shirt, short sleeve, long sleeve, doesn't really
Mhm.
matter. You don't have to wear a tie. You certainly don't have to wear a suit, but if you're comfortable with that and you like that, some people, I know I like wearing a suit. I feel a little bit more confident sometimes. That's perfectly fine. How would you describe business casual for the young women interviewing? So to give them some context.
I think sort of a nice blouse or sweater with, again, some nice pants or a nice skirt. Um, I think that would be as far as I
Mhm.
would feel the need to go.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think about if it's in person, your footwear. You don't have to
Mm.
wear, dress shoes or high heels. It could be nice tennis shoes, but not your old tennis shoes that you run in track. Maybe not flip-flops. It's happened before. It's not going to completely tank your interview, but the admission office might kind of laugh about it a little bit.
Right.
And you just want to think you're presenting yourself, professionally, whether it's academically or for the scholarship. I would say our scholarship interviews, people did tend to dress up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Again, it wasn't a requirement, but I think that it just felt a little bit more, the pressure was there a little bit, so maybe they felt a little bit more confident dressing up, and I totally
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And will the folks that you are interviewing with, will they have read your admissions application? I think to your point of not memorizing a script, should you assume that they know stuff about you, or should you be prepared to provide, the highlights?
Yeah, it will vary, I would say. If you're doing a scholarship interview, they probably have reviewed your application. That being said, you still want to be familiar with it in case someone asks you to go into detail about something that's on there, or in case maybe one person, if it's a panel, for instance, maybe one person didn't get them in time and so ask some
Yeah.
questions. So you definitely be familiar with what you put in the application. If it's a admission interview, regardless really of whether it's with alumni or whether it's with a admission officer, they probably have not reviewed it, because you might be interviewing with someone not who's not going to be the person reviewing your application.
Yeah.
And maybe you submitted it a couple of weeks ago and it hasn't been reviewed yet, and your interview is coming up. So I would say you want to be thinking about, well, what can I present beyond my application? Because even if they haven't read it yet, the notes from your interview are going to become a part of your file. And if they're just
Yeah.
replicating what your application already says, you're not really
Yeah.
adding anything to your application. So you still want to be able to go beyond that, whether even if they haven't read it already.
Yep. What should you do, Jonathan, at the beginning of your interview? Is there good and bad ways to kick things off?
Yeah, a couple things I'd say. It differs if you're doing it, online or
Right.
virtually, or whether you're doing it in person. But virtually, saying hello, smiling, being polite. If you're doing it in person, recommend shaking hands before you start.
Mhm.
Um, and if it's a panel, shaking everyone's hand, saying hello, and getting situated. I think another thing at the beginning that sometimes where students kind of make I hesitate to call it a mistake, but I think it could make the interview go smoother. Usually there's just some like, hey, let's get situated. It's like, oh, how is your day? Is sometimes a question that's put out.
Yep.
And I've seen some people respond to that where they like rant about something bad that happened that day and for
Ooh,
too
yeah.
long. And it's like, okay, that's not the vibe we want to set here.
Yeah.
And I've seen other people when it was on campus launch into like, oh, I did this visit and it was so exciting and I saw this and this, and they kind of start monologuing. It feels like a prepared script, and it's like, we're going to ask you questions. Just, it's okay. We're just kind of breaking
Just
the ice a
chatting.
little bit.
Yeah.
So, allow for some of that, back and forth. You're just kind of getting to know each other and settling into the interview. It's not starting from, the moment that they see you. Most likely they're going to have a little bit of building a little bit of rapport. Then you'll
Yeah.
know when you're getting that first official question.
Yeah. What are there specific questions that are common that students should be sort of in the back of their mind prepared to answer?
Yeah, I would say number one question, and you probably are seeing this a lot on supplements if you're working on those, is why this college? Why do you want to
Mm.
attend here? Why did you decide to apply here? You definitely should have some specific things that you want to say about that. Other common ones I would say is that maybe asking about a current event that you find interesting.
Mm.
And so, thinking about in relation to your major, what's going on in the news that might tie into that. So that might be something that they ask about. They might ask you to elaborate, as I said, on the things on your application. So either things that you kind of mentioned in your activities list, for instance, but
Mhm.
didn't write about in your essay, or if they haven't read your application, they're going to ask about the things you're involved in. And you might be surprised sometimes they pinpoint something to ask questions about that you weren't expecting. So, for instance, I have felt that a lot of students were surprised if I saw they had worked in retail or at a restaurant. I often ask about that. Oh, what did you learn from that?
Mm.
And I could tell sometimes they're like, oh, I didn't think you would ask about this. I thought you'd ask about my robotics team or Model UN. And I would ask about those too, but I felt like that, oh, sometimes you learn some unique stuff, through that experience. And it's about seeing, can students be reflective about their experiences? So those are some things to ask. I always also like to end with a fun question. So sometimes you'll get those off the wall questions. I like to ask, if you had to live the rest of your life as an animal, what would it be and why? I got some very fun questions or very fun answers from that.
But now I'm thinking about it. I think I'd be a fish, Jonathan. I'd like to just
Oh,
hang
okay.
out in the ocean,
Nice.
just float around. That sounds
Yeah.
good to me. Well, now I have to ask you, Jonathan, what animal would you be?
Well, I would do dolphin. Yeah, the ocean does seem pretty
Yeah.
fascinating. So I
Yeah.
like
We could
that.
hang
But
out, Jonathan.
yeah, yeah, perfect. Sounds great.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned asking about the job because in our last segment, I was talking to Shayla about working a
Hmm.
part-time job in
Mhm.
high school, and she was talking about some of the same things you mentioned, what you can learn from that experience. So that is perfect. How long should you spend on it? I guess I should ask, how long do these interviews generally last? And in any given question, how long should you actually address that question?
Yeah, I've definitely seen some variants out there. I would say on the short end, maybe 20 minutes, maybe around 30 minutes is my more popular. I have seen some that go 45 minutes or even an hour. I think those are a little bit on the outliers on the
Yeah,
longer side. So probably about 30 minutes is how long the interviews would typically take.
perfect. And on any individual question, I think you mentioned we don't want to give a whole monologue.
Yeah, I think that, if it's helpful to have a time in mind, I would say obviously the questions will vary and
Yeah.
the length of the answers, how much you could say, but at least 30 seconds probably for most things, and
Yeah.
maybe capping out around 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That's not a hard and fast rule. But one thing to note for, and I recommend, a lot of times it's the student's very first interview. And so maybe doing a practice interview first.
Mm,
If you notice the interviewer asking a lot of follow-up questions, oh, can you tell me more about that? Or, oh, well, what did you like about that? That's an indication they're not getting enough from your answer. So,
yes.
like, for instance, if I ask, like, oh, what's a book you've read recently that you enjoyed? I don't just want you to tell me the name of the book.
Yeah.
I've kind of implied there is, well, why did you enjoy it? So,
Yes.
make sure you're giving the kind of the content that they would be looking for, even if it's not directly stated in the question.
That makes a lot of sense. And I hope after listening to this segment, students will be maybe a little bit less nervous about the interviews, but I understand why it can still be a nerve-wracking experience. Do you have any tips for students who do get nervous thinking about an interview or in an interview?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say in terms of like thinking about where this interview falls in terms of your application, I think a lot of times maybe what adds to the nerves is that it gets kind of treated as the equivalent of like a job interview. And I don't think
Mm,
that's accurate because often a job interview is there's the filtering process of resumes and cover letters, and now the interview is to get to the next place. Whereas an admission interview and even a scholarship interview, I would say, becomes a component of your application. And so
mm,
all of that is viewed in context with each other. It's not, oh, the interview is the make or break it. No, it's just a part of it. It's a piece. In terms of being nervous during the interview, typically people have one of two responses. They either start talking a lot or they start talking very little. And it's always better if you're talking a lot than if you're talking a little, because then we're just not
mm.
getting that information out
Yeah.
from you. So, you want to put yourself in a scenario to, if you don't know which type of person you are, to find out. If you're one who talks a lot, then that's okay. You just kind of try to slow yourself down and kind of realize like,
Mhm.
oh, they're asking those questions. They're going to ask more. I don't have to tell them everything here. If you recognize you're someone who tends to get quiet, well, that's something you have to work on. And so something you have to
Mhm.
kind of think about. We can tell usually if someone feels nervous, and that's when I would throw some lighter questions in there, slow things
Yeah.
down, or I would offer like, hey, do you want to come back to that question? And it's fine for the student to ask that as well. Just know you are going to come back to it. So
They're not going to forget about it, Jonathan. That's
right.
what I'd be counting on.
Exactly. But yeah, those are some tips I would say to try to alleviate those nerves.
And is it all a one-sided conversation or do you get to ask the interviewer questions as well?
Yeah, in almost all cases, you should be able to ask questions. I would always end with, "Do you have any questions for me?" So definitely come in with at least one, maybe even two questions, because maybe your initial question gets answered, and you kind of can figure out the cadence and the rhythm of the interview. Sometimes you might be asking those questions and getting those answers during it. It doesn't have to be all you answered everything and now you ask. Sometimes it works that way, but you'll kind of see it's the style of the interviewer, it's how that particular interview goes. They will vary, but definitely come with a couple of questions in mind and things that you can't just look up online, something where you're asking about their experiences or something like that, or, more details about a specific program.
Yes. And actually, you mentioned this earlier. I meant to circle back to it, but you mentioned early on something about an interview being optional. Are admissions interviews typically optional? Are they required? Does it vary?
It will vary. I would say more often they're going to be optional. And then for those that might be scholarship related, those typically are going to be required to move forward in the scholarship process.
And if a school, sorry to interrupt you, but if a school offers an optional interview, do you generally recommend taking them up on that offer? Is there any reason not to?
Oh, that's exactly what I was going to say. So great teeing me up for that to answer that. Yeah, I would say, if you have never interviewed before and you tend to get really nervous in those one-on-one situations, don't feel the pressure to do the optional interview. Is it it can be a way to share a little bit more about yourself, but it is by no means the most important part of the application. The other things that you're submitting are going to take precedence over that. So, if you feel like I don't know that I can do a good job presenting myself, or I'm going to get really nervous, or I'm just extremely worried about it, don't feel a pressure to do it. There's going to be plenty of people who are admitted that don't go through the interview process because they can't interview everyone that they end up admitting or who applies.
Right. And I think that's a good note to leave folks on. Don't worry too much about it. It'll be fine whether you do it or not. You're going to be fine. You're going to get through it. So thanks so much for sharing this awesome advice, Jonathan. It was super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And listeners, stay tuned. I think especially the parents on the line, I think you might be especially curious about this next subject. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit about the changes that the One Big Beautiful Bill might make to the way you're going to pay for college. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. And I am now joined by my colleague and former financial aid officer at Becker College and Anna Maria College, Laurie Peltier. Welcome, Laurie.
Hi, Shannon. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And I know you just celebrated a birthday, so happy belated birthday, too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And so today, to celebrate your birthday, Laurie, we're going to talk about a Budget Reconciliation Act, which is, I know, how most people like to celebrate their birthdays. So this recently passed Budget Reconciliation Act, which is known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, it had some provisions in it that may impact the way families may pay for college. And I think we should probably say up front that there's a lot in this bill. This is hundreds of pages long. Obviously, the pages about education are much fewer, but there was still quite a bit in there. So much that we won't get to all of it today. We are going to do a second segment next week on the bill where we're going to focus more on the bill's student loan repayment provisions that we're not going to have time to get into today, sort of the back end stuff in terms of repaying student loans. There was a lot of information or provisions affecting student loan repayment in the bill. We're going to talk about that next week. Today, we are going to focus on the front end of things and how some of the provisions in the bill may impact families who are still in this space of either saving for college or maybe a little bit closer to college, thinking about how they're actually going to pay for it. So let's sort of move in a timeline, starting with earlier on in the process and saving for college. So Laurie, could you kind of break down what in the bill changed anything about saving for college?
Sure. So there's some good news that came out of the bill in regards to the use of your 529 plans. So the use of 529 plans has been expanded, most in the K through 12 years. So in the past, you could use $10,000 a year of your 529 plan tax-free to pay for tuition for kindergarten through 12th grade for your child who was named on the account. Well, they have expanded that to be $20,000 a year instead of 10, which is great. And then they've also expanded the number of things, the type of things you can use it for. So instead of just tuition, it is now curriculum and learning materials, online educational tools and platforms, dual enrollment costs, which is something we get all the time, questions about that here at College Coach, national test fees like the SAT and the ACT, which can really add up if you're in that college application process. So if you need the money to pay for some of these things and want to use your 529 plan that you have, you could. So there's quite a few added line items of qualified educational expenses, and they expanded it from 10,000 to 20,000.
That's great. I love that families have new flexibilities. And then the only sort of word of caution when I'm talking about this, I say, if you're counting on the 529 to pay for college, be careful how much of it you spend in advance. There's so much more you can now. You can pay for those SAT fees, you can pay for tutoring and the dual enrollment courses. But be careful of doing that if you're counting on the money to pay for college, of spending down kind of too much out of the account.
Right.
So parents have to be a little bit more careful now, I'd say.
Right.
Anything else about 529 plans?
So they've also added tax-free withdrawals for wider workforce on the job and continuing education programs.
Yes.
So that we're still waiting for a little bit more details, but in the past, it was, degree programs, qualified colleges you could use the money to pay for your tuition, for traditional college expenses. But now it's more expanded to include workforce training, which is great for those people who are going for those certificates and programs.
Right. You might have saved in a 529 thinking that college was in the future for your kid, a more traditional college. And as the years go by, it ends up turning out, well, that's not the path that they want to go on. And they would want to pursue more of a short-term certification, some other sort of workforce credential. And it's nice that you can now use your 529 for that.
Right. And one other thing that's been extended or put into place is the ABLE programs. So there are some provisions about the ABLE accounts that were due to expire in 2025. They have now become permanent. So those people who wanted to save in those or transfer their money from a 529 plan to an ABLE account, they can do that without worrying about whether they're going to expire or not.
Yes, and probably the folks who this relates to probably know, but we just for the record, an ABLE account, it sort of works like a 529 tax-wise, but instead of being for college expenses, it's to pay for disability-related expenses for an individual who has some sort of documented disability. And that can actually include education expenses, but the list of qualified expenses for an ABLE account is much more expansive in terms of financing medical and living expense sort of needs for a person with a disability. So that's also a nice flexibility to have.
Right, right. And then the last thing under what I would say is the savings heading is this new Trump account that came out. They're calling it a Trump account. It's not a 529 plan, but it is a way to save for your child's future. So it's been set up through this bill that you can contribute. Now I'm drawing a blank on the amount, $5,000 a year. Sorry,
Yep.
There's a limit, $5,000 a year that you can contribute towards your child's future, and you can distribute it after the age of 18. So it's kind of like put it aside, forget about it. It's going to be there, but not until they're 18. And it grows tax-free, but the withdrawals may be taxed, depending on how you're using it. It's really for higher education, a first home purchase, or starting a small business is what's written into the bill right now. And the tax rate could be at the long-term capital gains tax rate for the growth on that account. The other provision that they've put in with this Trump account is that if you have a child born in 2025 through 2028, so in the next few years, if you have a child that's been born, the federal government is going to contribute $1,000 as seed money into one of these accounts for that child, which is different. That's never really been done before.
Yeah, and that's, I think, probably, I'm guessing most of our listeners have older kids and are not planning on having a new baby over the next couple of years. But for those families that it does apply to, who are still in that sort of phase of growing their family, $1,000 of free money, that's a pretty good deal. So that's something for those younger families certainly to look into. And before I guess families go rushing out and think, how do I get one of these Trump accounts that give me that free $1,000 for my baby? They don't actually exist yet, right, Laurie?
Right, right. Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, I think and generally for folks listening, if you remember what I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill and sort of how a big bill becomes a law and all of that good stuff. What happens now that this bill has been passed by Congress, signed into law by President Trump, then sort of the next step is that the executive agencies have to take all of these new provisions that were written into law and actually like bring them into practice. So something might have been one line in this bill, but will ultimately require, pages and pages of regulations to actually implement this new thing that was one line in this bill. So for most of these things in the One Big Beautiful Bill, the actual implementation of them will take a little bit of time as the Department of Treasury, Department of Education, they have to figure out how to make all these things actually work that Congress has authorized.
Right, right.
So I think that covers the savings bit, Laurie. And then there are other provisions affecting families who might be closer to actually paying for college. Do you want to break those down for us?
Sure. So in the same vein of using the 529 plan for workforce education, there's also now a workforce Pell Grant. So in the past, certain job training, short-term job training programs did not qualify for Pell Grants. Now they do. So, complete the FAFSA form if you're, enrolled in one of those programs. And you could still get a regular Pell Grant if you're, qualifying for, regular college classes. But if you're in a workforce training, you would get a workforce Pell Grant. So that's great for those students. On the downside, foreign income is now part of the Pell Grant eligibility. In the past, a family did not have to report their foreign income to be eligible for a Pell Grant, but now they do if they have any foreign income, if that applies to you. Family-owned businesses, this has gone back and forth in the last couple of years, and I can't keep it straight, but now, going forward, you do not have to report the assets that you have if you own a small business, a farm, or commercial fisheries. So this could help you. Those assets are not going to be part of the FAFSA form for the one coming up this fall and going forward. So that could help you qualify for more financial aid. Yeah. And then the formula itself that calculates your student aid index to figure out how much need-based aid has been adjusted for inflation and cost of living, which hadn't happened before. Yeah. So now that's a good thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what feels to me like the most relevant change in regards to our work, Laurie, is there have been some new limitations put on the Federal Plus loan, correct?
Right. So the Parent Plus loan, which is a federal loan that a lot of parents borrow to pay for their child's education, was unlimited. So if you had a cost for the school that was $80,000 and you wanted to borrow and request $80,000, you could, as long as you had those costs behind it to justify it. The annual borrowing limit going forward is $20,000 a year per student, per dependent. So it doesn't matter whether mom or dad borrows, it's $20,000 for that student, with a lifetime cap for that student of $65,000. So even if you borrowed $20,000 each year, that would put you at 80. So now it's down to 65. So families really need to think about how they're going to pay for college and how they're going to borrow. It will, make some changes to those decisions for families going forward. If you're in the situation now, you can still take advantage of the current unlimited amounts. And even if you hadn't been borrowing, you may want to consider borrowing so that you can have access to that money if you need it going forward.
Right. They did put a sort of a legacy provision into the bill that says if you have borrowed a plus loan before July 1st, 2026,
for that student.
For that student, very good point. Then you can continue borrowing for the remainder of their program, max 3 years, under sort of the old unlimited rules, and the limitations kick in for anyone new borrowers after July 1st, 2026, correct?
Correct. Right. So July 1st, 2026 is kind of like the the important date to remember.
Yes.
So all these go into effect that day.
Yes. And we should also say, I think the Parent Plus limitations are most relevant probably in the immediate for our listeners. But the other change having to do with Plus loans is there's another version of the Plus loan called the Graduate Plus loan as opposed to the Parent Plus loan. The Graduate Plus loan is for graduate students to borrow to pay for their own education. Mm-hmm. What's happened to the Graduate Plus, Laurie?
It's been eliminated. So for those students going for a graduate degree, the loan options or the loan amounts that they can borrow in type of loans is shifting greatly. So it's going to make a big impact, I think, on graduate students. It just got a lot more complicated. And then, of course, what next week on the podcast, you're going to talk about repaying those loans and repaying plus loans and things like that. There's new aggregate limits of how much you can borrow over a lifetime. But this plus loan, I think, for our audience is the biggest impact.
Yeah. And we should probably clarify a little bit that what this means now, there's limitations on the plus loans. Maybe you only needed to borrow a little and you're just fine sticking with the plus loan. But what it's going to do is drive more folks into the private education loan market to borrow what they need to finance college. And they may do fine in that private loan market and great terms, but if maybe your credit is a little bit lacking or your income is a little bit lower, the plus loan never did an income verification. In the private market, they will. You may end up with a private loan with worse terms. In some cases, you may not be able to get a private loan at all, and those are going to be the people that are going to be in the most trouble with these new provisions.
Right.
Yeah. Well, on that cheery note, Laurie, thank you so much for joining us. And I should point out to our listeners, we've got a couple blogs on our website, getintocollege.com, specifically about the One Big Beautiful Bill. We will be back next week talking a lot more about the loan repayment provisions. But thanks for filling us in on the front end, Laurie.
No problem. Glad I could help.
Awesome. Also next week, in addition to the One Big Beautiful Bill, we're going to be talking about the concept of demonstrated interest and how that may or may not play into your college application process. And we are also going to kick off our annual What's Up series. What's Up meaning supplemental essays. And we're going to start talking about colleges, different supplemental essays, what colleges ask for, what are they trying to get out of a supplemental essay to try and give folks some insights as they approach that part of the college application process. So tune in next Thursday and future Thursdays when new episodes drop. And also, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much and talk to you soon.